come to these stories later, but for now, let's bring you live visuals of U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo finally meeting the Indian Prime Minister at his official residence. There are a whole gamut of issues which will be discussed during this crucial meeting. Remember, later during the day, the U.S. Secretary of State will also be meeting his counterpart S. Jaishankar. And there has been a sort of stagnation that has crept into India-US ties, which of course had picked up momentum in the past decade. And that is why it's going to be the first test of sorts for the External Affairs Minister to bring the Indo-US ties back on track. And let's also run you through all those issues that will be on the agenda of Mike Pompeo. And let's actually hear those issues from Ramesh Ramachandran, our associate editor, who's closely tracking the U.S. State Secretary's visit to India. Ramesh, the visuals have started coming in. What is it that we can expect out of Secretary Pompeo's meeting with the Indian Prime Minister?
Well, the significance of this visit lies in the fact that this is the first high-level visit from any foreign country to New Delhi after the inauguration of Prime Minister Modi's second term in office. Right. Pompeo will be meeting Prime Minister Modi and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, and also later in the day, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. Now, this is, as I mentioned, the first high-level visit to India, and this will lay the groundwork for the Modi-Trump meeting to take place on the margins of the G20 summit in Osaka later this week, where Mr. Modi will also have similar trilaterals with the leaders of India, Japan, and the US, as well as Russia, India, and China, in addition to the BRICS grouping. So clearly, all eyes will be on the bilateral, regional, and global issues of interest and concern to both Washington and New Delhi.
All right, Ramesh, let's also speak about the timing of Secretary Pompeo's visit that, of course, is going to be dominated by rising tensions between US and Iran, not to forget the ongoing trade war between China and the United States.
Absolutely, Akanksha. Iran is the big issue confronting both New Delhi and Washington and many capitals around the world as we speak. Iran is the one big issue confronting the G20 as well. Remember, many countries in the G20 rely on Iran for the supply of oil and gas. We've seen China bypass the US sanctions and continue to buy gas from Iran. But India, on the other hand, has completely cut off oil supplies, imports from Iran. And that will be a major issue of concern for India in the talks with Pompeo. Remember, on the 2nd of May last month, the US ended the exemption for India to buy Iranian oil. And since then, we've seen India completely cut off imports of Iranian oil. And that will be is hurting India's energy security. So India will be looking to the US for alternatives going forward. And that will be one of the issues will be discussed between Pompeo and Jaishankar later today.
All right. Also, Ramesh, can we finally expect India to re-emphasize its stance when it comes to its deal with Russia regarding the S-400 missile system? And let's not forget, US has been opposing it, and this is going to be on the agenda of Mike Pompeo as well.
Absolutely. Now, last year we saw India sign the agreement for the purchase of S-400 missile defense system from Russia. This deal is worth more than $5 billion. And since then, we've seen America urge India to reconsider its decision to buy Russian arms because they do not want any money to go into fueling or augmenting Russia's defense and security establishment. And we've also seen America threaten India and many countries with what is known as the CAATSA Act,
right,
or countering American adversaries through Sanctions Act. Now, essentially what Washington is saying that if you pay for Russian arms, we will impose sanctions on India. So India is looking for exemption from the US. They believe that they have enough grounds, enough reasons to seek exemption from the US on purchase of S-400 from Russia. Now, that said, Turkey is one US ally in the NATO which has defied US sanctions and said we are going ahead with the purchase of S-400. So India has many precedents to follow in this case as well.
All right. Another topic that is likely to figure in the talks is going to be the H-1B issue with American officials saying that Mike Pompeo will assure India that the Trump administration has no plans to impose a cap on issuing the highly sought-after H-1B visas that are forcing foreign companies to store data locally. Can we expect any sort of assurance coming in from America when it comes to the issue of H-1B visas, Ramesh?
India has raised its concerns with Washington in the recent days, and we have heard from the U.S. State Department that Washington has no plans to put a cap on the H-1B visa issues. Remember, India is among the largest recipients of the H-1B visa every year. Almost 70% of the H-1B visa go to Indian applicants and Indian employees, Indian skilled workers, which enables them to live and work in the U.S. Now, there are concerns in the U.S. as well on the issue of immigration. Now, India sees it purely in terms of a trade issue, labor issue, mobility issue, but Washington under Trump sees it as an immigration issue, and they want to cap the entry of immigrants from outside and enable domestic workers to get paid jobs. So that is one issue which will figure in the discussions later today between Pompeo and Jaishankar. But that said, India says we have raised these issues with Washington in the past, and we can expect to hear from Pompeo even in New Delhi later today.
Ramesh, Mike Pompeo is also expected to interact with Indian and US businesses at a roundtable meet and deliver a policy speech at IIC in Delhi this evening. What is expected to emerge out of this meeting? How significant is going to be this meet?
Indeed, as you said, after Pompeo's talks with Prime Minister Modi and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, he will hold talks with Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar, and later in the afternoon, after the joint press statement with Jaishankar, he will meet with the Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, where he will lay out Washington's vision, Trump's vision for trade in India-US relationship. We'll talk about trade, they'll talk about tariffs. Remember, US has removed the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, in favor of India, and India has since retaliated by imposing counter tariffs on American goods, especially American agriculture produce, such as almonds. So we'll expect Pompeo to talk about, to allay Indian industry concerns going forward on trade and tariffs. At the same time, technology transfer will be much on the agenda of Pompeo. Remember, India is seeking to procure technology, high-end technology from the US, and both sides are negotiating the text of an industry act which will enable both countries to access technologies going forward as well. So clearly, many items on the agenda in sort of trade, tariffs and technology go.
Right. And Ramesh, you've been closely tracking international ties for a very long time now. And looking at Secretary Pompeo, this is his third visit to India by a Secretary of State during the Trump administration. How do you think that India and US ties have gained momentum, especially when it comes to Secretary Pompeo?
Well, if you look at the recent trajectory of India-US ties, Akanksha, Prime Minister Modi, when he visited the US for the first time in Modi 1.0, said that India has overcome the hesitations of history. That was a very seminal moment in India-US ties, which means that India is not willing to go by history, go by the past, and chart a new chapter, so to speak, going forward. And since then, we've seen the ties grow in the years ahead. And this time, this is the first visit in Modi 2.0, but Prime Minister Modi has met with President Trump on many occasions in the past, in the bilateral level, at multilateral level. So we can expect both sides to discuss the entire gamut of bilateral, regional and global issues of interest and concern to both Washington and New Delhi.
All right. And Ramesh, another interesting aspect of these talks are going to be the Huawei issue. You know, US has been pressurizing India to ban Huawei from its 5G development. What can we expect out of Pompeo's visit when it comes to Huawei?
Well, China will figure tangentially in the discussions here in New Delhi between Pompeo and his Indian interlocutors in the context of America's policy in the Indo-Pacific region, which straddles the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. And India sees itself as a linchpin of the Indo-Pacific policy. And India also has what it calls its own Act East policy. So Act East and America's Indo-Pacific policy will complement each other going forward. Now, that said, the immediate context of concern concern for both US and India is the Chinese technology companies such as Huawei. Now, Huawei is very much in play in the game for 5G field trials in India as we speak. The Indian government has not banned Huawei yet, unlike many countries in Europe and the West. And the US is asking India to go slow on Huawei, to reconsider its decision to allow Huawei to take part in 5G field trials. They want India to consider other alternatives going forward, but India is hedging its best as we speak. India has still not banned Huawei from the 5G field trials.
Right, exploring alternatives, an interesting phrase you use there. There are going to be exploration of alternatives, not only when it comes to, be it Huawei or even when it comes to the issue of the oil crisis in Iran. It's important that India asks for those alternatives to come from US. But for now, thank you so much, Ramesh Ramachandran, for bringing us all these details. You are going to be tracking Secretary Pompeo's visit, and we will keep coming back to you. Now, moving on, China has asked Canada to halt all of its meat exports to China after the discovery of bogus export certificates. The move is likely to affect the $235 million meat trade between the two countries. China's decision comes after an investigation revealed 188 fake veterinary certificates and many safety loopholes. Canada's agriculture minister has accepted the presence of fake certificates and said that they are working with the Chinese officials to resolve this issue. The two countries are claiming that the issue is technical and is not politically motivated. However, relations between China and Canada have been deteriorating since Huawei's CFO Meng Wanzhou was detained in Vancouver on a US warrant. China responded by detaining two Canadians and charging them with espionage. China have already stopped importing canola seed from Canada, and meat seems to be second on the list. Canada is one among many countries which have been affected by the ongoing trade war between China and US. Now, the latest from Hong Kong, where protesters are determined to get their message out during the G20 summit, even where mainland China has decreed that no discussions on Hong Kong will be taking place. They have organized a crowdfunding campaign to finance front-page newspaper ads urging G20 nations to get involved. They plan to submit a petition to each consulate asking their government to confront Chinese President Xi Jinping at the summit this weekend. The protesters will be visiting the US consulate, European Union office and the UK consulate. Meanwhile, United Kingdom Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt has urged Hong Kong to set up an independent investigation into the violence during the recent mass protests. Addressing members of Parliament, Hunt expressed concern over actions by Hong Kong's law enforcement agencies, including police firing, tear gas and rubber bullets.
We remain very concerned with the situation in Hong Kong, and I raised those concerns with the Chief Executive on the 12th of June. I today urge the Hong Kong SAR government to establish a robust, independent investigation into the violent scenes that we saw. The outcome of that investigation will inform our assessment of future export licence applications to the Hong Kong police, and we will not issue any further export licences for crowd control equipment to Hong Kong unless we are satisfied that concerns raised on human rights and fundamental freedoms have been thoroughly addressed.
Hunt's decision means that export licence would not be approved until concerns about human rights abuses in Hong Kong were thoroughly addressed. Remember, protests in Hong Kong began after Chief Executive Carrie Lam tried to push through a legislation that would have allowed suspects for some crimes to be forced to take trial in Communist Party-dominated courts in mainland China.